How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the revenge of the 6th episode of the Geek Inspired Podcast, a show that highlights how geek culture shapes people's lives. And today's people's is the dissector of play himself, Tristan Jacobs. How are you doing, Tristan?
I am well, and how are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to chat to you today about stuff because you're the first fellow academic guest that I'm having on my show.
It is an honor.
And it's really exciting because my content going forward is actually going to be trying to bring these two things that I enjoy together, geek culture and academia and science, and trying to figure out like how all this stuff affects us as a culture and like biologically. So I'm hoping to have many more academics like yourself on the show talking about geek culture. So let our beloved audience know who you are in this moment and the type of work you're doing in the geek culture space.
That is the best request for an introduction I've ever heard. Where are you in this moment? I love it. Okay, so by day, I suppose I work as an academic, as you said. I'm head of department now, actually. I was a lecturer at an applied university that predominantly teaches filmmaking, but I come from a theater performance background. So a lot of the research you may have encountered is mostly around live performance and engagements with that. By night, I suppose I am a trained actor, and I do that on the side. I like creative work. And before we were meant to meet, I remembered that before I went to go study drama at Rhodes, I was adamant that I wanted to work in film and media and tech because in school I studied science, maths, and computer studies, and then drama just came out of like left field.
Yeah. Interesting. So what are your kind of main geekdoms at the moment? What's kind of keeping your attention in your free time?
The main geekdoms. So I think you're aware that I work on and with Dum Dum Die, the D&D podcast from South Africa. And that D&D enveloped my life at the end of 2016. And it's a pity that I only found it like much later. I wish I'd known about it while I was studying performance, entrenched. So D&D keeps most of my geekdom high. Recently, because of the new release, the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, I think I've been affected by their marketing campaign because it has made me interested in Magic the Gathering. So I've been looking into that world. I quite like strategy card games. The other thing that keeps my geekdom on a regular sort of quota is Warhammer 40k. I'm a little bit of that was my entry, I think, into tabletop. But I think the thing that I'm entrenched in the most is D&D. I play on general stances 3 times a week, 3 different campaign games.
Oh, that's cool. 3 different games. That's a lot of time.
Including Dum Dum Die, which I don't really play in. I just...
You're part of the production on that. So was 2016 the first time you were introduced to tabletop gaming, or was it before that? How did you first get into it?
I want to say, when was my first year? It was back in 2005, 2006, when 2 of my good friends, both named Warren, were playing Warhammer 40k. And I was like, ooh, games! Because we were the people that played video games a lot. And I've always liked games. I think my first PC, I was 16, which is quite late, I think, given young people nowadays. But back then, it was like flash drives were only, 256 megs. So I've been playing video games for a while. And I think 2005, 2006, I was like, Warhammer, little miniatures. Wow, you can play games on a tabletop. But D&D proper, role-playing, only 2016.
Oh, that's quite interesting. So... I mean, I also just joined this rabbit hole and fell down the rabbit hole of D&D in 2016. Even though I heard, cursory things about D&D previously, I had never worried about it until my friends suggested we get the D&D board games, which is not D&D, but it's close enough. And we started playing that. I think it was Wrath of Sheldon, Castle Ravenloft, and Legend of Drizzt.
Those are the big board games. Massive and really complicated, big. Complex things,
yeah. So the thing with that is that, we started playing it, and then I didn't feel like we had enough control. Like in the board games, like the monsters just appear randomly every time you walk into a room. Like you go in, you like walk off in a direction on a tile, and randomly a tile piece will be added, and then randomly like a monster will be added. And I didn't like that kind of, like, I wanted a bit more kind of narrative control, and maybe some like things being like more thematic instead of random. So I then decided to just start, before I even knew what a dungeon master was, which is weird, because obviously D&D came out before the board games. Like borrowing the board game, like seeing what was available, and then making like stories up for the board game, and then running it that way. And then I was like, okay, this is silly because there's already a thing called D&D that exists, and from scratch you can make stories. So then eventually I persuaded the rest of my group to actually play D&D proper, and then I fell down that rabbit hole. We haven't played the board game since then, but we played D&D like regularly, every week with
So that was just the gateway drug.
And the gateway drug was the board games, which is interesting way to get a D&D, but that's how it happened.
And you're the DM, yeah?
Yeah. I'm usually the DM for #ForeverDM because no one else wants to run.
I know, right?
Are you running any games right now, or are you just playing?
I luckily am playing, but I find that when I want to have a game where I'm interested in, I have to be the one who incorporates people and has to incite the gaming. It has, fortunately for me, I suppose, been handed over. But I know I'm preparing for a one-shot for the Dum Dum Die crew, and that excites me. I think I'm more prone to one-shots, actually. I've never run a campaign. Oh, wait, I lied. My first GMing experience was Star Wars, the role-playing game. So I didn't even start with like easy D&D. Like I was playing in D&D, then we kind of were wrapping up the starter set campaign, and I was like, I want to GM. Let's do something other than D&D, and it was Star Wars, and I think I ran that starter campaign for someone. So that's the closest I've come to running a full campaign.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So how did that then transition from, okay, this is a cool thing to do and fun to play, to having a look at it academically and then starting like Dum Dum Die? Because I think those two things are connected, right?
They are sort of connected, yeah. I think so. My academic experience in life has always been just purely interested in ways to incorporate what I've studied from performance into the things I like, geek things. So I think my honors paper, the first paper I really felt, hey, I can be an academic, because I was pretty average in undergrad. I was like just coasting through and then hit honors, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can study what I want to study. And I wrote a paper on machinima, on the idea of performing in video games as opposed to just playing a video game. And that got taken up by the South African Theatre Journal, and that was my first experience of going, oh my gosh, I can research the stuff I like doing, the geek things. So I suppose I'd been working for the current institution I work for a year or two, and they'd been pushing me to do my PhD. And on the one hand, I've got this interest in Japan and Japanese culture and anime, and I think you share this anime love and experience. And there was that one sort of aspect to take, and I had started that, and then it wasn't working out. And I discovered D&D in 2016 and went, oh my gosh, I could study this as performance. And that kind of took hold. And then I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I thought, what a cool medium to play in. And I was already feeling I need to explore things other than necessarily stage and theater. So I approached it from a theater perspective and thought, well, I'm used to performance as research, practice as research. So if I just make this thing, I can study it as I make it. And Dum Dum Die became that vessel, I suppose. So yeah, they are one and the same thing. I don't know if I've answered the first part of your question, though.
I think so, maybe. We'll probably circle around it a couple of times in the rest of the show. So then, how did you? Were you already friends with Carla and them before, or did you approach them specifically for that? So
it's a mixture of things. We weirdly, like I said, I approached it like I would when I produce and direct a play. So we ran auditions, really, and I was definitely adamant on the all-female podcast thing, because I felt that was the niche that we could fulfill, and I think it was something that's usually where my work circulates. It's the stuff we don't see very often. It's the stuff I want to see. So I'll make stuff I want to hear or listen 2 or C. Carla, I don't know if she remembers this, but I first met her, I think, in between my studies, in between my honors and my masters. I was touring work around the country. I was just performing in odd things, freelancing as an actor. And I went to the NSA, and she was there, and she was running a workshop on the Suzuki method, grammar of the feet. And that was my first exposure to it, which eventually became my master's degree. So I don't know if she knows how pivotal she was. But that's where I first met her. So I'd known about her. And then Kirsten and Nicole, I had obviously worked together with before, because Nicole was a student at the institution, and Kirsten is my partner, obviously. And then we were asking around. Eventually, we somehow, I don't know how we got across to Carla. Carla is like big in the geek scene, so inevitably someone knows Carla somewhere. And we were like, oh, but she's super busy. I think I'd found Bacon Battalion, and I was like, oh, Carla, Eventually, we approached and said, you know what, actually, we do need to ask you if you could do this thing. And she was super keen, and she suggested Wednesday. And that group with Kut, who was a friend of mine from sort of Rhodes, from having studied, she did drama, but then specialized in something else. So she had moved away from it. And I said, come back, come back to this thing I know that you kind of enjoy. That group, that makeup of those 4 to 5 people worked the best out of the different people we played with, different actresses that I'd known in the, I suppose, industry.
That's pretty cool. So since you started and you guys have been working for like a good year and a half now, like what's been your experience? Is there anything that surprised you? What are some of your favorite moments? Like what went down over these past couple of years?
Oh, wow. I've been surprised by the amount of interest. Like I'd thought, I come from a theater background, so generally you fill a couple of theaters and you're like, awesome, I made an impact and that's it. Having something that lasts this long and that connects globally has been really new. So I think that's been a defining factor for us, is the majority of our listeners are not even South African. So the last, I think, 3 to 4 months, at least from my side as one of the co-producers, has been to push how do we build a South African audience and a South African listenership. That has been the exciting part, learning how podcasts work. Damn, that first month of like, all right, so we're going to test out the recording equipment. I had to, thank goodness for Veed, who's a musician, and he just took me to like an audio shop and said, all right, this is what we need. And then he had to wangle and finagle and talk to the people. And I was like, yes, I'm with him. Yeah. Like learning the learning curve of what equipment we need, how then to get your podcast up and accepted by iTunes and all that jazz, where to host. I'd had audio editing experience because I worked at a community radio station for like 4 years while I was a student. So I knew how to edit audio. That was fine. There was all this other stuff. One of the highlights has definitely been playing with them. And I want to play with the Dum Dum Die, the Kalandos arc a bit more. I think Carla should work in an NPC. Looking at you, Carla.
For sure. I want to hear some more of you on the show. But yeah, that's quite interesting. And for sure, I think D&D is just getting bigger now. I think we just coming online in South Africa. We're still pretty young. In my opinion, in the tabletop scene, but with the advent of board games, as well as D&D 5th edition over the past 5 years, and also all these other role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu and Star Wars and stuff like that, and Starfinder and Pathfinder, like it's gonna get bigger. And also I think well, this is from geeky academic kind of perspective. I feel like role-playing games have the potential to become mainstream, because they just hit on so many things that other mediums don't hit. The agency, although video games do provide a bit more agency than a movie or a song does, or a piece of drawing or painting. There's just nothing like tabletop role-playing games for agency. Like you can try almost anything. You can always ask your DM, like, okay, can I do this? And there's always some variation of something you can do. Whereas in computer games, PC games, console games, that you are always still restricted by the code, like no matter what you do. And then like I was talking with Carla about it last week as well, that There's also other aspects. It's social right now. Even though we're in a connected world and everybody has easy access to a lot of other people, actually getting together with people is much more difficult, I feel, for a lot of people, because doing it digitally is so easy. So coming together with people, at a table just to play games also adds to that. There's also, like I discussed last week as well, mental health benefits. There's people in the psychology sphere now actually looking into the effect of Dungeons & Dragons on psychology. I read a few papers about that, fascinating. I know you're also interested in that as well, because you contacted Dr. Megan Connell about it. Yeah.
Indeed. I'm still making my way through a lot of her material. Yeah. But because someone has done that, right? And what's her face? Sarah Lynn Bowman, I think, published a book a couple of years ago. She connected it to sociology. I thought it was quite interesting. So my aspect is definitely more performative, but I hear you. It's like there's more of this stuff happening.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I'm keen, because I'd like more players at the table, but also more DMs, so that I'll get to play at some point. which should be fun.
Once someone has played, I feel like they're definitely more inclined to DM. There's just something about, I don't know, it's the stories. For me, that's one of the core sort of through lines of the research that I'm proposing. Is it's this attraction to stories that drives us. And I think society, technologically, we're connected to our screens, and as you say, online, digitally, all the time, to everything. There's something about sitting down at a real table with real people that you cannot take away from us. So I love that aspect, in that it's like going to your own personal private performance. Like, you walk up to someone's house, you don't have to have bought a ticket, you don't have to have read reviews on whether it's good or not, that adventure. You just have to rock up, and then it's like, cool, we're going to go on this thing. And I play sporadically with a friend of mine who in London. So she's the DM, then a friend of hers is in London. There's 2 other South Africans, and then there's one in Berlin. So we sometimes play online. And I love that campaign and playing with those people, but the experience of playing through your screen online is not the same as when you sit physically around the same table.
Yeah. It's totally fun. And it's also, and like D&D is also used for team building in corporate culture as well. Not all the time, I suppose, but there are people doing it. I also believe it should be. For sure. So, geez, I had a really interesting question that just left my mind the second I talked about something else. It was about board games specifically. So do you do any reading or thinking about like cooperatives, like narrative-driven board games in that light as well? Because I would suspect that it's probably very similar to D&D. So have you thought about that?
I have a couple of board games. You can't see them. They're underneath that TV in the background. And that's also been pseudo gateway drug for me. I wonder, I think the same. There is the experiences I've had with things like Betrayal on the House on the Hill and Mysterium. What else is there? Those sorts of things. I think it has a very similar experience. I totally agree with you. Like, getting people together and playing those board games. I wonder, this is why families always have like a games night, and why Monopoly got so popular, even though it's terrible. It's that, I think it has the same things, and I probably will find a way to include it in some portion of the research that I want to do.
For sure. I'm looking forward to that paper. Whenever I just went through like your ResearchGate today. If guys at home don't know what ResearchGate is, it's kind of like the Facebook for academics, where people like post all the research for people to read. And I just requested a bunch of your papers.
So, sweet. I must go on there and give you access and stuff.
So I'm pretty keen to see like what you come out with during the course of your PhD and further, because the stuff that fascinates me. Most of my reading is like about fishies and like so it's interesting to read like in academic context about gaming and stuff like that. So you also did a conference presentation about the effect, not the effect, but kind of around narrative storytelling in video games, specifically, Shadow of Mordor. So do you have any interesting insights about that research that you can let me know? Because I haven't read the paper yet, so I'm interested.
That's, interestingly, someone at the conference I presented that short, interesting proposal of research at was interested and connected it to her research, which is particularly into South African film, mostly Afrikaans film and sort of the Anglo-Boer mythos. And she's taken that and sort of we've made a co-written paper that's going to be taken to Poland, I think, in January. But she has to go by herself because I'm not available. And it gets published there. So you can look out for that sort of combination. But in its core form that I made, I think I was interested in dynamic antagonism. So you've played Shadow of Mordor, I assume.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
The whole captain's system
the Nemesis system. Yeah.
The Nemesis system. Yeah. The fact that is unique to you as a player, and that algorithm generates these unique characters that will remember what you have done, makes a unique story for you. So that was kind of the thing I was interested in. Again, unpacking the malleability, I suppose, of video games, like you mentioned earlier, where TRPGs are so much bigger and more fluid. This was one aspect that I think aligns to the stuff I'm interested in terms of how we craft a unique story for ourselves, as opposed to going, well, this is the same story that thousands and millions of other people have just played through. Even though I love God of War, it's different. Yeah,
it's different for sure. It's very different experiences. Yeah, open world games are, they scratch, I suppose, a bit of that itch of trying to have agency in the world, especially with games that are really expansive, like maybe GTA and Red Dead Redemption.
Oh, yeah. And as far as maybe something like Minecraft, I guess.
Yeah. Minecraft I suppose it's more of a creative thing, I suppose. It will hit on that artistic creative side. But there's also, you could create your own story if you would
That's
like.
it, yeah.
In that world. And Minecraft, was crazy popular with all of the kids, like since it came out. And it's probably one of the highest grossing properties that's probably still making money today, and I still hear it mentioned every week or so.
Totally. I truly believe that we can't get away from stories, and that stories and storytelling is like an inherent human trait. It's like in our blood. So even just being given a creative world to go make stuff, you'll start making stories out of things. For
sure. One of my favorite things to say these days is that human beings are storytelling machines. It's just It's just what we were built to do, to explain everything that was going on around us, because we have such, high processing power. We are self-aware. We are aware of the environment. But obviously we didn't have scientific tools, 10,000 years ago. So we had to just make up stories to explain things. Otherwise we would have went mad, I think, just trying to say why did that volcano blow off and kill my entire village, what else beside a god, in the sky that did it?
Totally. There's a wonderful speech sort of thing. Oxford Union, is it the Oxford Union, where they do that? There's a presentation by a speaker, a very influential person. I think it's the Oxford Union. The guy who plays Joffrey in Game of Thrones, I forget his real name, the actor, gave the most incredible talk around celebrity-ness or celebrity-dim and where it comes from in our sort of evolution as human beings. And it's, as you say, we put people on a pedestal because if that person could shoot a bow really well, we needed to tell their story, and everyone needed to know that they are the model so that we could repeat that and all do that. That's why we made celebrity status a thing in society. Yeah,
for sure. I can definitely see that happening. So let's move on to you being a Japanophile, which is another thing that I feel like we kindred spirits in many respects.
Just going to say that.
So what drew you to Japanese culture? How did that get started?
Oh, man. I feel like for a lot of people, it's always anime, is always the entry. And I'm pretty sure I would have seen samurai in movies and that sort of thing. So the standard sort of, I suppose, Western white people access would have been that. I remember my first anime, again, was around about the same time I got a computer, because it was back in the day when you had to ask people for videos. I think young people nowadays don't even know what that means. They're like, everything's online. You just stream it. But you had to ask someone. You had to get a flash drive or DVDs. And burn the things onto whatever, was Neon Genesis Evangelion. So it was a bit of a baptism by fire.
For sure,
but I remember being exposed to this because I watched a lot of TV as a kid. I didn't do sport in primary school. I went home, I did my homework, and I watched TV and played outside, I suppose. So I was already exposed and loved cartoons. I think I watched Cartoon Network until I was in my third year. I still watch cartoons a lot. And anime was that transition into something more, I don't know, there's something rich about anime. There's a quality that is different from Western stuff. So I think that was my first exposure, and that led to being interested in the culture and the people and the way things are done slightly differently. And I think that was always the interest of mine, at least in my honors. I'd begun looking at Suzuki in the beginning of my honors year, and then it was too much. So my research, my personal thesis for my honors, then drifted into, let's just do video games, because that's also the other thing. I see myself as duality things very often. So moved into that realm rather, and then came back to Suzuki later. And that's when I really knuckled down and said, all right, I've had these years of training in performance. I've had years of watching anime. How do we blend them together and make it substantially academic?
For sure. Very, very interesting. So, I mean, you can't pull out a word like Suzuki without explaining it, because I have no idea what that means. So why don't you give us a quick rundown of what that means?
Remembering. Tadashi Suzuki started a company for theater, and what was really interesting is he started directing in Japan in the 1970s, when the biggest thing was, oh gosh, I forget the name now and someone's going to murder me on the internet. Damn, it was in my thesis as well. The word for like Western theater. So what you traditionally, conventionally think of when you watch theater, it's like Shakespearean, it's sort of the well-made play, all that sort of jazz. That was predominant. Shingeki, there we go. Shingeki theater was what they called it in Japan. And Tadashi Suzuki was like, let's go back to our roots. Let's look back at the traditional theater, like Kabuki, No, and Bunraku, and actually find ways to make that contemporary theater. So he was doing that, and I found that fascinating. And he made a performance technique that was really grueling for actors, and I've always been drawn to that sort of thing. I've been exposed to clowning as a theater type, which to me is one of the hardest ways to act, because it's like a Zen style of acting. You have to unlearn everything you learned to be an actor. There's like all these formulas and this like magical if and emotional memory and being like in the character, and then the clown is like, strip all of that away, just be here, be present and be here, and then be funny, I guess. So I was attracted to that sort of challenge to performance styles, and the Suzuki method is very physical, very grueling. It's a bit like kata, it's a bit like karate in that way. There's like very strict forms, and the thinking is that if you can do that, you can find a powerful presence in stillness. There's this wonderful story where one of Suzuki's actors in Toga, in a village in the mountains, they have like this festival once a year in the winter. It's like hectic. There's one actor in the 2-hour performance kept a pose so long that a spider drew a web from his elbow to his body. And that was meant to be like this profound, amazing
top tier acting.
You know? So it was I was interested in that sort of thing. So Suzuki, to me at least, the grammar of the feet is that technique that lets you find your connectedness to earth, making you have presence by, I think any actor who might be watching this knows, you pull a golden thread up through your head and you root your feet to the ground so that you create the space in the middle of your body that is interesting and magical. Suzuki calls that hipari ai, this space here that is powerful and present.
That's really
I
cool.
hope that's sufficient.
So have you watched the anime Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, the anime about Rakugo
performance? I think I've watched the first one. It rings a bell. There was a period like 2 or 3 years ago when I started getting back into anime a lot more and trying to watch all the more recent stuff, and I've been very bad since then. But I think I've watched the first episode of that. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, I'm like theater noob. I think I've only been to one theater show because our school forced us to, and it was like King Lear, I believe. But because I'm in other fields, it hasn't interested me. Although now I'm starting to get very piqued by art and economics. Because science is really hard on your mental health sometimes, so you have to like go into other spaces. So for sure, it's an amazing show. You definitely should get through it. And that style,
Rakugo performer.
It follows 2 Rakugo performers. And that side of theater, I think, is sitting down, so it must be different, I suppose, compared to other stuff.
That's the one where it's one guy telling stories, and he kneels, guy, woman. I think that is the Japanese equivalent to stand-up comedy. It's like sit-down comedy, I guess.
Sit-down comedy, yeah.
The South African Japanese embassy, I think 2 or 3 years ago, brought a guy to South Africa, and he performed at Tux, I think, at the University of Pretoria. and I went to go watch that show. Very cool to watch it live. And it's the same thing. I'm glad you connected the two things. Japanese performance is all about strict discipline in learning your craft so that you can then be good at it and an amazing performer. But it's very rigorous, the kind of training you have to go through for that as well.
Yeah. With most things in Japanese culture, very traditional, there's very set ways of doing things. I think that's why there's so many anime where protagonists are the ones that don't like to do the set ways. You know, they are the ones that kind of like break the mold and do things in different ways. I think because their culture is so like set in traditional ways, having those protagonists that kind of break out of that mold is conflict, I suppose, to the rest of the characters.
Good point.
Interesting. Maybe that's something you can tackle in a paper at some point.
Writing it down.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, all this stuff. And Japanese culture, I've always, ever since I discovered it, I've always been enamored with it. And it's hard to pinpoint like what exactly I like about it. But I think it is that traditionalism, you know, like it's kind of, the masters have figured out how things are, you know, and like, so it's just up to you to put in the work, you know, to kind of get through stuff. And it comes across, you know, in any of the work that they do, and like also the, you know, the entertainment that they make. And it's really fascinating and interesting. Right now, I'm actually watching a show, two of the shows which are actually very D&D inspired at the moment. One is called Goblin Slayer.
I've heard of this.
And something you should look at. And the other is That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, which is more MMO, but obviously MMORPGs draw a lot from role-playing games. And one is very serious, the other is very comedic. But really, Goblin Slayer actually is very good for drawing kind of inspiration for D&D games. I've already have a few ideas from there that we're putting in games now. So getting back into, you know, research, what made you choose like getting into academia over like focusing on like production, like because it's two very different worlds. I would suspect, you know, one would be a lot more curiosity driven, while the other is more like creativity / I suppose money, because somebody has to pay for it to get made, and then, you know, you can get profits back from it. So I'm just interested in how, because you would have had both of those options to focus down in, but you chose kind of both. So
I think my two responses are from already what you've just said. So the one is, I discovered the struggle of sustainability, at least in South Africa, to do the things I was interested in, as you say, like finding the money to do that in the art scene. And then secondarily, I am curious. So I trained for 4 years, particularly in performance and acting. So crafting myself as a tool to be used in other things, and then discovered once I started freelancing that I like creating. And when I came back for my master's, I was like, all right, I find myself in a curatorial position. I find that is where I'm most excited by things, is when I can curate, which I think is why D&D is so nice for me when I DM, because that's what it feels like. You never write a complete adventure to take people through. It's your thing. It's like, I will build a very loose structure here, and then I'll curate your responses to make something interesting. That to me is exciting. So I discovered that. And I wonder, actually, so after those two responses, I think the answer for me is that, in fact, you have to do a lot of research in your curiosity to prepare for creative work anyway, which is a lot like academic research for me. So they've always overlapped since I started studying, and I learned that. And I just found, I went to London in 2014 to try to do the same sort of thing. So I got an agent there and was looking for more work related to what I'd studied. So wanting to work in academia, masters, trying to work in the industry there. And it was slow going. Eventually, I came back to South Africa after about 6 months, which I still slightly regret, actually, because I think if I had pushed through, there might have been something. But I had a good chat with my friend Temba, He was my peer that year in Masters, and I called him up the one day, 5 months in. I was like, damn, I'm just having such a cuck time. It's not working. And I remember his words so clearly. He said, what are you doing over there? Come here and play with us. And I'll never forget his words, because that essentially 2 weeks later I had a plane ticket, and I was like, yep, I'm back. So I got back from that experience and went, all right, what am I going to do? I think I spent a week or two working at the National Arts Festival because I knew it. And I'd met someone there who 3 weeks later said, oh, there's a position at this university I work for. I think you should apply, which I did. And it just the ball started rolling from there. I've always enjoyed the creative academic drama space, because the drama department at Rhodes was astoundingly good. And particularly in your postgrad, they give you so much space to play, to discover yourself and discover what you like. And I found academia works. It's interesting. It gives me a certain sense of ritual, I suppose, in terms of regularity, of like, cool, you have to be in this space and you have to work quite often here, but enough creativity to be like, all right, well, some days you'll work 10 to 12 hours. Other days you may only come in for a 2-hour rehearsal, but then you're free to go find your own stuff. So I think they mesh quite well in my field, maybe less so in the biological sciences.
That's pretty cool. My roommate's brother actually is studying acting in London, so that's an interesting connection. I don't really know much about that, but it's interesting, I suppose, given, I don't think, but I wouldn't know, because I haven't gotten that into it, that, the acting industry here is as big, when it comes to like live performances, theatre and stuff like that, here than it would be in London or New York or Hollywood, certainly, like Los Angeles. But I think, if we play our cards right, especially because, a lot of people are filming here because it's cheaper, that's what I heard, at least. There's a lot of like production companies setting up shop in Cape Town and stuff to film. If we push our cards right, we might get it better. So what do you think about the future of that industry in South Africa?
I think we have an incredibly strong industry. I think the sets, at least I've been on, are super professional. I think our live performance skill and talent is there. And maybe I'm just ignorant and I should be more critical, but I honestly believe we have everything we need. Maybe just not the economic infrastructure to support that. And maybe it's a societal infrastructure as well. I don't think South Africans generally are compelled to go out and watch theatre. I think there's a very small group of people that do that.
So there's a marketing problem, I would suspect.
And I don't know how to solve it. And I'm lax to try take that on my shoulders to champion that sort of solution. But I'll do my best navigating, at least now, what we're really interested in from my experience in working with Dum Dum Die and media and new tech is the idea of the live stream. And I think that's an interesting translation for my background in live performance and what it means using tech.
Yeah, for sure. It's a problem that we have in science communication as well. Like just trying to translate, this piece of academic literature, which is filled with jargon and numbers and things that, that lay people don't understand. But it's been so difficult, I think, for scientists to convey, to communicate the stuff that they do with the general public. And I feel like it's just a marketing problem. Like if you learn marketing principles, and it's the best time to do that now, because anybody can create a small production and put it up on the internet for people to see. YouTube gives you that power, Facebook gives you that power. You don't have to go through any gatekeepers anymore to create stuff and to communicate anything that you are doing. But I'm starting to see it pick up with science communication, and I hope, I also want to delve into that. And this channel is going to start becoming more science communicating, hopefully.
Excellent. Yes.
Going to be interesting to see how it goes from there. But for sure, it's the easiest time to try. You don't have to pay you don't have to pay for a print article anymore. In fact, that'd probably be dumb to do because not many people are reading those type of stuff anymore. Everybody's on social media, so you have to go where the people are. It's the best time to do that. So I'm guessing there might be a similar problem when it comes to the acting industry. We just have to pay for more for more marketers to, let the lay people know that this is a viable way to get entertained, because it is, I'm sure. It's been around for a long time.
For me, the question has always been, what makes it more viable for an audience member to leave the comfort of their couch and their home with watching Netflix or whatever to come out to a venue? What is it that compels you? So finding that is what's interesting to me. And I think that's also why I'm drawn to D&D. Sorry to bring it back to that, but I am interested, but I'm less interested in creating content for someone to consume via the internet, like a live stream or like what Dum Dum Die is, and more interested in how anyone can invite their friends over to then do that. And I wonder if that's more compelling for me.
It is pretty compelling for us, at least, for geeks. But speaking about compelling people, to leave the comfort of their house and go see something, I'm sure, I'm you in the industry, so you know better than me, but the movie industry is taking a hit now, especially with cinemas and streaming kind of replacing that. What's your feeling on that, and how do you think, these cinemas can get people back, butts back in seats, to put it lightly?
Gosh, I feel like I should probably do more research to answer this with any amount of authority, but as a guess from an ignorantish person,
we're just having a conversation here. It's trolls.
I don't have to provide accurate information.
No citations are going to be in this.
For me, I am obviously not someone who has like the money to have a massive television screen in the house. And no matter how big they get, I still think you cannot replicate that feeling of being in a big dark room for that cinematic experience. But maybe that's just because I've grown up knowing that as the place to watch movies. Having said that, I think there is something to be said also about sitting in a room with strangers watching something. There's some weird sense of community you feel when you can laugh with a whole bunch of random people, different to when you're either by yourself or a few other people on your couch being like, haha, we like this movie. I think that's what draws it to me. And I wonder if it's about the marketing and the companies that own cinemas focusing on that for their marketing. I wonder if it's about that.
I had a discussion a couple of times with other people, like usually like ex-film students who always tend to become content creators. But I think like those theaters should be used for like live streaming events, like live streaming sports, live streaming music concerts, even stand-up comedy, whatever, because you go to those events specifically for that, like to be amongst the people, to see someone live. I suppose you can't obviously replicate seeing someone else live on the screen, but it's close enough. And you want that sense of, camaraderie and laughing with people and enjoying stuff. And because it would be live, there's merit to that, because it would be happening at the time.
Correct.
I feel like that's the best way to actually boost the cinema experience and to reinvent it, because the thing is, it is just way too expensive to go to the cinema to watch a movie these days. Like, I would rather just stay at home and wait that 6-12 months, whatever, to watch the movie, because it's ridiculous at this point to just go watch something for an hour and a half and spend over like 200 Rand doing it. It's crazy. Like 200 Rand I can spend on a video game and be entertained for like 30 hours plus.
That's it. We have enough to what's the word, compare now, and that's all you do. You go, well, that money could be spent over there.
Yeah, exactly. And we live in South Africa, and like money is tight here. The Rand does pretty badly against the dollar. So like every time the Rand gets worse against the dollar, all our entertainment prices go up. And it really sucks. Like when you're a video gamer, like when I first started playing, when I first bought my own console, the PS3, when I first started buying games, they were like max 400 Rand. That wasn't that long ago. That was like 2011. 7 years later, prices have doubled almost to the point of tripling.
Yeah.
And like people's salaries have not gone up in the same respect that much. So like so true. It's rough out here for entertainment. But
I wonder, connecting those things for me, the thing about the cinemas, I wonder if it's appealing to anyone else other than me, whether streaming like live esports in a cinema would be attractive to anyone.
For sure. They do. I mean, E3 does have places where they show, they live stream the event in cinemas around their country. So I would suspect that, doing similar things here, or anywhere, esports would make sense. I would suppose. At least some.
So, I'm thinking of like a half-day pass for like a 2 to 3 hour thing that you can go to a Stoke Canicle or New Metro, whatever, and it's like a live Dota thing or Overwatch or whatever it is you got to watch, and then you sit there with like a whole bunch of people in the cinema going and then cheering in your own space for this live event that's happening somewhere else. I suppose like watching live sport in a bar.
Yeah. But it's a more like comfortable experience compared to a bar. Well, a different experience. It's going to obviously attract different types of people, but I mean, we should at least try it, because I feel like the high production stuff is just the sit-at-home experience is just outweighing the going to the cinema experience. But you can't do that with live events, like, because part of it is like the kind of atmosphere that's happening. So
I agree.
To recreate that, I think would be the way to go. But what do I know? I'm not in that field.
Who are we?
I'm a fish scientist. So from your Twitter profile, I remember seeing that you're into esports on some level. So tell me a bit about that, like, because that seems a bit different, more than the other stuff you do.
I suppose. I think I mentioned this earlier that I come from a video game background, and that was, I remember the days when you wouldn't just organize to play online with your mates. You had to invite them over, and they had to bring their computers, and you had to set it up on the dining room table, and you had to get all the plugs right. Someone had to bring a hub to connect all the LAN cables. Like, that was fun. I remember those days. So I have that experience, and I'm interested in just working in the games realm as well. So what I've done is, in January this year, I proposed to the institution I work for that we start a student esports team, because college esports seems to be on the up and up in America and Europe, but nothing's happening here that I can tell. Like, I did my research first to find which universities have done it, and there were a couple that had started them as clubs, but then they'd fallen apart. So I wanted to try my hand at that, and it took a couple of months to draft a team, and I partnered with Open Window in Centurion, who's super cool, super friendly, super keen. They've done pretty much the bulk of the work to host an esports event. And we had our first Counter-Strike CSGO comp, I suppose, between the two institutions. When was that? In September. And the plan is to establish a mini sort of league where any university that can assemble a team can take part in this league, and we generate college esports. Because I really honestly feel, looking at the filmmaking students that come to my institution, they don't all end up going into film, or they don't all go into TV. They can do all manner of things, and I feel like esports is an industry they can access, and we can build that so much. So I'm really interested in growing esports through college esports at this moment. So we had our first comp against Open Window in September, and the next one is on the 1st of December. It's our Overwatch, competition. And you were looking forward to that because we're growing. So we worked out the kinks the first time. It's like, okay, what room do we need? What tables do we need? How do we set them up? All right, is this fair? How do we stream it live to spectators in a neighboring room? So we've leveled up for this next one in the 1st of December, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it turns out. I didn't actually put two together with college esports, even though it's essentially the same thing as other sports. It's competition that people can watch. But thinking about it in that way, it's like actually getting colleges involved is really interesting. Might be tough in South Africa, given how like universities and colleges like to just sink money into one of the sports. Trying to convince them to take budget away from maybe rugby and putting it into esports might be difficult, but once they realize that the gaming industry is one of the biggest, most highest grossing industries right now, overtaking things like Hollywood, they might realize that it's lucrative and maybe go down that route. But getting to a point where we can convince them, I don't know how long it's going to take, but eventually
someone's got to wake up at some point.
Somebody's here.
The marketing world is trying to figure out how to leverage it, because I think gamers are the best kind of audience to be marketed to, because they won't be schneid. They're like, if this is not the service I want and that I'm paying for, I will not use you. And marketers are trying to figure out how they can't lie to that audience. They've got to really just show you the thing. And how do you show it with esports, which is not like conventional sports where there's like a halftime moment where we want to see ads about whatever and this and that? How do you leverage brands and marketing into that space? I think that they're working it out. And I do think there's a lot of scope. So I agree with you entirely. That's, if we can build college esports to feed into an industry that's growing, there's hope there.
Yeah, fascinating. And I'm keen to see how that turns out in the next coming months. So I don't want to keep Tristan for a bit too long. I'm sure he's busy doing a lot of the things that he's doing. Sounds like a lot of shit.
I like juggling, apparently.
For true. So thanks for joining me on the show, Tristan. It was quite fun, and I hope to have you on again so we can talk about, the next bits of research and how the esports stuff is going. But in the meantime, let our beloved audience know where they can find you and the work that you do.
On the social medias, you can pretty much look for @TheatreWalker. Generally, that's my handle on stuff. Otherwise, you'll find things if you search for me.
Search here, Tristan Jacobs, Theatre Walker. All right, so that's it from us here at The Tunes. And if you like the show, please do leave a like and subscribe and all that jazz that content creators tell you to do. Otherwise, stay geek inspired, stay tuned, and cheers.
Huzzah!
Now I need to cut that in.